There's no way to put it other than this is like a celebration, a promotion, maybe a birthday, a wedding. This is probably the most expensive whiskey I think that's crossed my desk all year. And if it isn't, it's certainly close.
The very definition of special occasion bottle.
Right. I mean, the packaging, we may as well just dive into it. So, for folks who maybe haven't tried WhistlePig before, this comes from WhistlePig, straight from the farm in Vermont, USA. This is a rye whiskey, and this is their annual release called the Boss Hog. So, before we dive into this and get some notes going, should we dive into limited editions real quick, John? Like, this comes out
Yeah.
once a year, right?
Yep, that's correct.
All right, so once a year this comes out. Usually brands have what's known as a core portfolio. So they have bottles that they release all year round. They have bottles that they want to make sure are always on the shelf for people to buy. But every now and then, some brands do it twice a year, 4 times a year, or once a year in this case. They roll out a limited edition. It's usually maybe it's older, maybe it's better. Maybe it includes some really rare components or some extra finishing casks. So they might take their whiskey and put it in a different, like a wine cask or something that's not just used American oak or new American oak. And some of them like bump up the proof or the price. This is, if I'm not mistaken, is all of those things. This is Boss Hog IX, and it's called the Siren Song.
Yeah, so this picks up kind of where the last two editions of Boss Hog were sort of a coast to coast or continent to continent driven release, where they explore different types of oak, different types of finishes. And so they're using this high age dated. Actually, I don't think they're age dating that. I'm sorry. They're using their mature rye. I want to say that the Boss Hog 7 was 17 years age dated, but I may just be confusing the details on that. So
no, you're totally right. And it's hard because they don't put we know that this is a 17-year-old whiskey, but they don't put that on the bottle anymore.
Okay.
So it's kind of in that technicality land. Like this is no age statement. We had to write it like such on Whiskey Raiders, but we know that this holds their oldest whiskey.
Right. So this is going to be their like richest, boldest, oldest, and most mature whiskey that goes into these expressions. They've got sort of like a set of tenets that go along with Boss Hog on things. Like it's always going to be cask strength. It's always going to be single barrel, which we'll have to touch on how that works. But it's always going to be like this opulent, over-the-top, delicious experience. And it's supposed to be something unique. You've never had something like this before, which maybe the earliest expressions of Boss Hog were a little bit tougher to say that. Although if you transplant back to that time and you drop John and Jay into 9 years ago and say, hey, have you ever had a rye whiskey like this one? I'm going to say no, because at the time I hadn't. So in today's world, it's tougher to look back at those earlier expressions and think that they're super unique, because this one here, this takes unique and then kicks it in the nuts and then drags it through the mud and says, I'm going to show you what unique is right now, because this is something totally off the wall crazy. And it's really cool. So the actual finishing on this was something that I mean, when this label first hit the TTB, like the cola approval came through, I thought it was a joke. I was like, what in the hell is this going to be? It is finished in Greek fig nectar and a scratch-made Tentura, which is a Greek liqueur that I think the closest approximation I could have, because personally I had never heard of this before, and I feel like many American whiskey drinkers likely have not, is that if you could picture Jägermeister, not necessarily in flavor profile, but in the fact that it is like an herb and spice driven liqueur, I think that is the closest approximation I could give you to be like, it is a Greek version of this with its own set of herbs, spices, and flavors that go along with it. And WhistlePig, instead of sourcing this, of course, decided they're just going to make it. So they scratch made their own everything for this. So they made their own Greek fig nectar. They made their own Tentura. And then they were like, okay, now we can chuck that stuff out of these casks and we can age our whiskey in there to then make the blend. Jay, I don't even know what to think about that type of process. Like, what kind of creative meeting does that look like?
Right, right. And it's funny, when this announcement hit the internet, all I heard was silence for an hour afterwards. And I can only imagine that's because everyone Googled like what's Greek Tentura? And I have to
Yeah.
say, I just spent 2 weeks in Greece and Tentura never came up once. So we are scratching the most obscure itch.
Tentura Obscura.
Yeah, Tentura Obscura. That's what they should have called it instead of the Siren song. But yeah, this is old rye whiskey finished in possibly the most unique barrels I've ever heard of. And having tried thousands of whiskeys at this point, that's a pretty bold statement to make.
Right.
And on top of it, it's bottled at pretty hefty. This one's 54.7% ABV, and then they put it in this fancy bottle with like a pewter topper and everything. This just screams like, of course, like no wonder it can only come out once a year. It took a whole damn year to concoct this and get someone to like. I hope they contacted like an old school like Greek person who was like, tell us about Tentura, because I don't even think it's really made that much anymore. Like I think it was an old historical drink.
So the lore behind this release, every release of Boss Hog has its own story and its own lore, and you could dive deep. So if you purchase a bottle of Boss Hog, you can register that bottle, and you can then join into the Boss Hog forums and talk about that. Like this is like way deep rabbit hole stuff. Like this is borderline dark web material for people. Like you need to be careful going into the rabbit hole of Boss Hog because you can fall in and get lost. But the lore behind this is that Liz Rhodes and Megan Ireland, who are the head of whiskey development and the head blender at WhistlePig, respectively, were on a trip to Greece over the summer and fell in love with certain flavors there and the food and drinks that they got into. I don't know where they went that you didn't, that they were sipping Tentura and whatnot, but hey, they must have had a hell of a time because they came back with this wild ass idea of, and not only is it unique, as you mentioned earlier, Jay, this is the first whiskey ever, they say this on their website, this is the first whiskey ever finished in fig nectar and Tentura barrels, which to me kind of screams like, well, fucking obviously, because who the hell would have thought of this besides WhistlePig?
Right, and who would age it in one or the other, let alone both?
Like, yeah, let's just do both.
I'm not surprised.
Right, so here we are coming up with these things that nobody's ever heard of before or tried. Nobody in the American whiskey world, obviously. And on top of that, the pewter top that you mentioned is made in Vermont as well. This edition of Boss Hog has 9 different toppers. So these are now what is, I think, largely considered a fairly collectible whiskey is now even more collectible because not unlike Blanton's, it is sporting different toppers that you can collect all the different ones. So I can only imagine what that'll do to some people's bank accounts. And on top of that, they also, for the first time, rolled out NFC technology in the back of the label. So you could touch your phone to it and it'll pop right up. And then you can register your bottle, claim ownership of that bottle. So it shows, it's like a path of authenticity, for lack of a better term. So when you buy this collector's edition whiskey that costs $600 you get to then actually make sure that you could say, hey, yes, I do claim this bottle. I own it. And you can, again, like I said, get into the forums and talk about it with people. But for now, man, I need to take a break from talking and I need to get into some of this because I could smell it just sitting on the desk here and it's doing things to my brain.
I know it's killing you to not be drinking it at this
it is
second.
Killing me, man.
I mean, the flavor on this is just incredible. And I'm glad that they released this in the fall because this tastes like Christmas to me. It's got like those spice drops and pound cake. It's got like tobacco and some of that like anise. It's like the fig is there, the rye is there. This is so interesting and just crazy, and it's blowing my mind, which is really hard at this point to have something this unique. And I feel like every time I sip it, I get a different flavor, which is really interesting. Like sometimes it's like cocoa covered cherries and spice drops, and other times it's tobacco and coffee bread, and other times it just tastes like pure brown sugar and rye spice and all that kind of stuff. But like, what a wild whiskey, and also like what a risk. Like it's already hard to sell $600 whiskey, but to sell $600 whiskey that no one has ever reasonably tried before.
Yeah, this is batshit crazy in both idea and in flavor. It is really, really fucking nice. I mean, this is, I have no issue saying that this is whiskey of the year material right off my very first sip. Like this is, and which this here is most certainly not my first sip of it, I should probably add. I've been digging deep into this to really get involved with it. And I think the amount of layers of spice that are going on in here are very evident on the nose. But it's also like you mentioned, like there's a spice drop component there that I agree with that assessment. But as I dig into this, I'm also reminded of like an orange spice cake with a like mascarpone type of frosting. Like there's a real like cool velvety creaminess right up front on this in terms of texture. I think it's just like super opulent in the way that this drinks. And there's so many layers to it where it's like you said, there's some fruit components in there. For other, it's like does come through sometimes as like a fig jam or an orange peel or a cooking orange or even a blood orange. You get some of this like dark cherry note, like you mentioned too. And that can kind of like be its own roller coaster. But then you start throwing in like, oh, geez, there's like a real good hit of cinnamon in here on this sip. And then maybe on an exhale, you're like, oh, I hadn't really noticed it. But there is like this little kick of anise or licorice or maybe even like a fennel seed kind of thing happening.
Oh, yeah.
And then on the next one, you're like, huh, it does almost have a little bit of like a cocoa powder or like a dark chocolate happening. And like, I feel like it would be really interesting, I think, to give this to 10 different whiskey reviewers blind and say, you can only pick out 5 notes. You're going to get more than that, but pick out 5 and share them and then see when you get 50 different fucking answers. Cause this has just so much going on.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if the same like if different people give you the same notes, because it's kind of crazy. Overall, I was gonna ask you if you think this is a success or not, but it sounds like if you're talking whiskey of the year, that we're already there. This is weird, and I don't mean it in a bad way, and I don't mean it in like a hey, watch out kind of way. Like this is strange, but works in a way that I haven't seen in quite some time. Like I have no qualms about being like, it's weird, but I think just about anyone will like it, which is, kind of a bold endorsement, but it's bizarre, but it's delicious. Like I wish more ryes tasted like this. Obviously, we're going to need to get more fig nectar and Tentura into the United States to make that happen. But
seriously, I didn't know we needed Tentura this bad, but holy shit.
Right. I didn't know we were missing out on this flavor profile. Especially as winter comes. Like this is right there with Midwinter's Night Dram for me. Of like it's a cold night. I want something spicy, fruity, sweet, different, interesting.
1,000,000%, dude. Yes.
That grabs my attention, and this doesn't.
Yeah, this is a very, very like comparing it to Midwinter Night's Dram is a great idea. I mean, not in terms of like pricing or availability or anything along those lines. Just in the fact that like this instantly teleports you right to like sitting in front of a fireplace, sitting next to the Christmas tree, sitting down to a Christmas dinner or like a New Year's dinner, even like just a very holiday focused palette of very big spice vibes that are counteracted with a ton of fruit. So it's not like this is all spice, and it's not like it's all 17 to 20 year rye that is driving you nuts with being a little bit too oaky or a little bit too rye driven. This is just an absolute fucking orchestra of so many different flavors happening in like a really cool way. It's not just like overdriven. I don't know. I don't really have a great way to articulate just how weird but cool this is.
Yeah, this is one I would say if you're at a bar and you don't mind paying a few dollars, try this out. It may not be full bottle camp, and certainly, I mean, this is expensive whiskey. This is not like, it would be really rash of me to be like, all right, everyone go buy the $600 whiskey, and I have to thank WhistlePig. They did send it to us, so we didn't have to go out and pay $600 for it. I would after tasting it, but so I want people to be in a similar scenario. You should go taste it and be like, okay, this is great. Or maybe you'll be like, no, this doesn't scratch any itches for me. And $600 to anyone is a lot of money. And so maybe we'll cover some like budget stars in an upcoming episode. But for this guy, it's bizarre. I think overall what WhistlePig is hoping is that the experiment worked. And I think for me, the experiment definitely works. Whether I would hope that maybe they can kind of do what Barrel does, which is, they have a $500 seagrass and a $250 seagrass and a $75 seagrass. But I would love to see $100 WhistlePig finished in Tentura casks. Like make it something you do a little more often, because that's wild, and they have cornered that market. Yeah,
this could very well be the Vermont version of a seagrass if done right. That's a really cool idea. I would love to see that.
Yeah, and for anyone who who doesn't know, barrel seagrass is a rye that's finished in like apricot and I want to say, is it
Madeira.
Madeira
Yep, and Martinique rum.
and Martinique rum. So is also a bizarre rye, and you should go check it out. It's $75 to $85. It should be on most shelves. Like I hope to see, a Siren song edition of just normal WhistlePig that's under $100 or right about there, because I think that could be a huge success for them, and that's all I can think about drinking this guy.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And where this is like a winter whiskey all day and every day, it is a holiday in a glass. It is like 8 holidays in a glass. I think
every holiday.
seagrass is the perfect yin to that yang, right? It is summer in a glass. It is the one where I recommended numerous times to when people say like, what's the best summer drink? Or we're going out on the boat, what do we bring? We're going to the beach, what do we bring? I just say like, bring 8 or 10 straws and a bottle of seagrass. Put the straws in the bottle and everybody can have a sip because it's fucking perfect for summertime. This perfect for wintertime. I would not do the straw thing with the $600 bottle, just for the record.
Yeah,
although
good call.
it would still be pretty kick-ass.
That would be it'd be like a golden straw. Like it would be weird about like a plastic straw.
Yes.
And it's kind of cool, I feel like WhistlePig does have a good grasp. For $600, you don't just get a normal bottle. You get a cool bottle, beautifully done. There's art in the topper. It's handmade. It's made in the USA. It comes in a fancy box. You have the whole tap your phone to the bottle kind of thing. The premium whiskey sphere is interesting because it's marketed to so few people, but this one too, I feel, doesn't lean in any weird gimmicks. Like it seems like it might from when you're like fig nectar ? But overall, I don't think this is a gimmick laden just way to snatch people's money. Like they really are going to be hoping that people try this, appreciate it, and think about it, because an unbelievable amount of work had to go into making this happen.
Absolutely. I mean, just like you mentioned, the amount of time to, once you have decided this is what we're going to do, to create these individual things like the fig nectar and the Tentura, to then take the whiskey, age it in there, or a secondary maturation in these casks, and then blend it, and then get your labels done. All of these 9 different pewter tops, this custom boxes that these come in. There's so many pieces to this release. It makes sense why it's a one-time-a-year thing. These type of crazy rare whiskeys are fun for more than just the sip in the glass. That said, if you are on the fence about this, or if you just want to try it, I think it would also make for a really cool, whether it's an anniversary, date night, birthday, whatnot. If you can find this at a bar, even if it is a bit expensive, give this one a try and have this be like sort of that like milder special occasion thing where it's like, I'm going to give this a whirl. I would say up to 50, 60, maybe even $75 for a pour of this, just to give it a whirl, is a really good way to kind of get involved with this really crazy expression. Try it out and see if this type of super rare whiskey is for you.
Yeah, and on a final note, $70 for a pour of whiskey at a bar, that's a ton of money. Totally get it.
Ton of money.
Also, though, this has a redeeming quality in that it's so different and so flavorful, and not like a pungent, overpowering way. Even if you're newer to whiskey and you're like, you know what, I still don't really know about tasting stuff, I guarantee when you taste this, something will come to mind. And that's really
will jump.
What tasting whiskey is all about, is it's making connections to things and experiences you've had before. And that's why, people who spend a lot of time cooking typically can taste whiskey a little bit better. It's not like you don't have superhuman taste buds for the most part, but it's all about kind of making those connections to things you've had. And this has such a diverse array of just flavor in it that I know that anyone could try this. And and that's why we kind of talked about, like, if you put this in front of 50 different people or 5 different people and said, give me a couple notes, like there could be so much writing on the paper because there's a lot going on. This is going to trigger a lot of different thoughts for a lot of different people. And I would be surprised if someone could taste this and be like, this doesn't, remind me of anything. This will give you a reaction, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, I mean, final conclusion here. This is a extremely unique bottling. By all means, this is something that you will hear about again from me. Be ready for that.